He introduced me as a born abstractionist.
In the past, landscape was just used as a backdrop for narrative, where the events would take place. But now it becomes the subject.
I think the first time that I painted it was just something that was actually so difficult that it just grabbed me right away because I couldn't do it.
I'm glad you said the word painter instead of artist, because if you'd have said, when did you decide to be an artist, I would have said I don't really consider myself an artist, mainly because I'm not really sure what an artist is.
Of course, you're a painter. I love painting.
Well, it's always strange talking to people about abstraction. I think obviously my paintings tend to make more sense to me than they do to other people. Sometimes people just don't know what to say.
Oh. Did you do that?
Yes. How does it strike you?
Well, I'm sure it's very beautiful, but what is it?
There's no really one focal point in this piece, so each section has kind of an area that you pause on, and that's very intentional.
I like to play with line continuing in the painting, losing it and being able to catch it again, especially when I'm trying to push out these reflective qualities of water and almost a mirroring. That just helps create some engaging elements that the viewer can find.
You know, I used to think that for a painting to be serious, it had to be really dense and heavy and dark. That was what serious painting was.
And I consider my work to be abstract because I'm really dealing with formal issues, composition, design, form. I'm dealing with those things, and that is really, really important, but it's not the only thing.
At times, the most abstract painting may bring to the experienced onlooker great human comprehension. The inexperienced onlooker who looks for identity will only see what he can identify, be it an object, a figure, or a style.
Do you remember those how-to paint books, the Foster? They were real big books. We actually did a lot of copying from Foster's How to Paint Landscape, the Grand Tetons.
I remember when I told my parents that I was going to become an art major. They were pretty shocked and mildly upset. I went into undergrad thinking about pre-med, and I think they thought I was going to be the doctor of the family. I had graduated valedictorian, was on almost a full ride scholarship, and here I was deciding that I was going to major in art.
My next door neighbor, I suppose he was in his 80s, and his name was Mr. Cook. He used to paint outside in his garden with oil paints, and I think looking out the window as a boy, I used to see him painting landscapes. It's a bit clumsy, kind of thick impasto type of paint, but I suppose that was my first impression of somebody painting. And he gave me some of his oil paints once, just to play around with. And I think that just gave me permission to start painting.
I really wanted to go to the Art Institute of Chicago, but there was no way, there was absolutely nowhere my parents were going to let me move to Chicago. And also the cost of the school was just out of our realm. My dad actually had a lot of influence on my direction. He was very, very supportive. And I think it's because he probably really wanted to go into the arts.
So I'm wondering how different temperaments and different childhoods, perhaps, what that has to do with how we connect to particular places.
You think about the artwork that was up in your grandparents' house. You know, I can remember this one Bierstadt painting that my grandma had over her couch and staring at it, logging hours of staring at it as a kid and thinking about what was it like to be in that space. I grew up in Minnesota, but I can really remember the idea of this kind of fantastical place and the magic of seeing that painting every time I walked in the door. And I think the idea that one of my paintings can move in the world and do that for somebody else or in somebody else's home, I love that.
When I had the opportunity to join the graduate program at Stanford, I leapt at it and drove cross country, bought a futon, moved into my studio that had no running water. And so that's how I lived for a couple of years. But I had a big open space, and all I did was paint.
That time period was very tumultuous. It was the Vietnam War. There was a lot of anti-establishment. We had the feminist movement, and truly it set a tone for me, because I was ready to immerse myself in every aspect of learning how to draw and paint, and we were having all this revolting going on around me. So it was really difficult for me.
For the first year there, nobody said anything nice to me about my work or about my work. I had to come up with my own criteria for, well, what is a good painting then? If I'm making something that I think is good, but nobody else seems to think it's good or the right way to paint, well, where am I then? Where's the work? How do I go forward?
And it is very cruel to discover one's mediocrity only when it is too late.
And I realized they weren't going to say this is nice. They really started to pull the pieces apart, much to everyone's horror. And of course, I thought, you know, a lot of this stuff was crap anyway on the wall. Mine was pretty good, so I thought they're not going to pull mine apart. Well, they did, and they pulled it apart on the most obvious thing that I wouldn't have thought of. And that criticism, it really kind of hit me. So that was hard. It was hard advice.
I never did understand this art business.
I ended up taking a class with Robert Skaggs. So one day he walks into class and he says, is anybody interested in if I would do a class in landscape and on location completely, and we find this park up north? So we all went, yeah. But at that point, you are coming out of abstract expressionists, all this anti-establishment. They threw away most of the easels because they figured no one else would ever be using them again. People were painting on walls, rolling canvases down hallways, down stairways, taking buckets of paint and allowing all of those accidental and intentional happenings going on that surface. So for him to say, let's go back out and observe the world, was a radical. I mean, it doesn't sound radical, but it was very radical at that time period. He really was helping us move into our own experience.
I believe that the whole tradition of art is our inheritance, and it would be as futile to deny it as it would be to deny our biological inheritance.
We understand that our work is coming out of a context of other artists' work over generations and cultures. Of course, we look at Constable, we look at Cézanne, but we go beyond Constable. We go to Rizdel, back in the Dutch school. You know, and we're talking about the figure-ground relationship of an image on an Egyptian vase and how that is used in Constable's painting, and of course it's used in Cézanne's, Picasso, and on and on and on. We're talking about perception, and we're talking about the flat picture plane, and bringing the idea of what you see in a spatial world back to the structural nature of a flat picture plane. And that's what we get really charged about and excited.
I'm interested in paint that has, that would flow in between kind of these lighter washes that you almost feel like you can swim in. And then I want that to be layered with something that has a much more intense physicality. It's almost something that you're knocking up against.
Now our eye is constantly moving. It's moving up, down, and it's going in, and it's going out, and it's hitting upon certain things, and the eye will actually stay and look at certain things.
Yeah, now something happened when I did that, because there's something about these curves that sort of turn, they're actually like turning the space under. And I think that's making this come out a little bit more, which is what I wanted. I'm almost posing different values, whether it's values in texture or it's values in color, values in light. And so there are all these sort of things going back and forth. And it builds, in some ways, it's what I'm using to build a kind of ambiguity in the work. But I don't want to bring everything up to the same level. You know, because that's part of the whole point of these images, is how you can kind of, how you're pulled up to the surface in places, and then other places you're diving down.
We all see the world differently. And it's an unfortunate thing about photography, is that photography almost implies that we all see the world in that way. And we don't. We're all seeing the world in a very different, unique, personal way. If you all stood on a hilltop and let your eye move around, we're not all in unison looking at the same thing and hitting upon the same space. And it's different for every person. Every person is individual, how they will, where their eye will rest in those spaces. And there's nothing wrong with photography, it's just that it's misplaced in people's minds in terms of being parallel with painting. It isn't.
The camera lens is a mechanical eye, seeing everything and recording everything.
A camera cannot give you the equivalent of that landscape, but the human being will give you the equivalent of a sensation or an experience that they personally had in a landscape. It's important to really feel the painting. You've got to feel the color, you have to feel the space and the form, and then you realize, yes, this is the equivalent of the space that I know and remember from the landscape.
When we look at it and we observe it, or we're in that work, what we're actually experiencing is mind. That's one of the things that attracts me to painting, is the opportunity to see another mind.
Well, sometimes a day, sometimes a year. You can't tell. It has to grow.
I never knew paint could grow.
Patrick George, who I think is a wonderful landscape painter, who would have been a great teacher, I think. I love the idea of working from the same landscape over a period of time. I don't mean 6 hours, I mean 6 years. And I couldn't understand, well, what are you working at over 6 years? Then I saw one of his paintings in the Tate Gallery, and I realized what he was doing. You could see the working, you could see the build-up, you could see the argument of measure, you could see the questioning, but yet it came across as a very coherent painting. There's more meaning to it, there's more thinking, there is feeling in it, but you have to find it. There's a philosophy to that work that isn't just what you see. It isn't just about measuring and getting it right.
Are they any good? You know, it's a hard business selling pictures. Yeah, people don't buy art nowadays.
It's just a kind of great validation. When you sell a painting, there is this sort of, okay, what I'm doing matters when somebody purchases something. When I think about my paintings living outside of my studio, I just think about them having a conversation with somebody every day, and I love that. I love the fact that, you know, somebody might come home from work and they look at my painting and it maybe changes how they're feeling, or they wake up and the painting is there, and that there is this sort of daily back and forth that happens every day with them in the work, and that it can affect somebody's life. I know it's hard to think about painting not having market value, and that maybe that's not necessarily the smartest thing to say, but I think there is this inherent value in taking the time to look at the world and say something back.
Where'd you get that? I just bought it. You think it's any good? Say, how about selling that to me? Okay, it's all yours.
It's an everyday experience of looking at artwork, and it might be something at first that we don't even recognize or notice, and then becomes not an icon, but just something more steadfast or something of comfort. My nephew Spencer, who now lives in Norway, had come to visit my studio in grad school. And he was only 3 years old at the time. And he walked in and he said, "My gosh, it's a giant pig. I love that, Aunt Betsy." I thought to myself, wow. It's interesting because this is kind of like immediate response, right? That a child is having to seeing something or recognizing something in the work and thinking, okay, I need to rework that painting. This is not about a giant pig, but great.
Your cousin's painting's wonderful?
Yes, Papa.
Isn't that one particularly fine?
Yes, Papa.
People think now that connoisseurship is elitist, and that you're talking about something that no normal person could develop or no normal person would be interested in developing.
There's bad music and there's good music. And I tell my students this, I say there is bad painting, and they look horrified, like, well, you can't say that. Isn't it a matter of taste and opinion? I say, actually, no, it's not. There are reasons why certain paintings are better than others, and I can tell you why.
You can't be a naive painter anymore. You can't just make marks and say, okay, whatever comes off of my hand is going to be great, because I'm expressing myself.
I'm interested in painting and music that is timeless. And then you might say, well, how do you know what a painting is and it's, well, through experience and years of looking and listening, you're going to realize which pieces of music and which paintings have that ever-present, timeless quality to them.
We have way too much sloppy, sentimental landscapes hanging on people's walls.
We are all connoisseurs of anything that we do over time. You could be a connoisseur of hamburgers. You know which hamburger you want, and you've had enough of them in your lifetime that you know which hamburger is the one that you want to eat.
Well, a bad painting is it's something that you've seen before that is repeated over and over again. I mean, how many sunsets can you see with geese flying over and little wooden shacks in the north of Minnesota? I mean, talk about, they're depressing.